Historical Association, speaking to you from the home of Ron and Frances King, and I have before me their father, Tom King, who was for many years MLA from this area. Now, Mr. King, before we discuss the reminiscences of the Kootenay area, could you tell me a little bit about your boyhood days? Can you tell us about the place where you were raised?
I was born in a little town called Angus near Barrie on the 5th of September, 1879.
That'll make you a fair old-timer.
I am an old-timer in this world, as men's lives go, I guess. I was started off to school when I was 4 years old because my mother told the teacher she couldn't keep track of me, and he says, send him to school and you'll know where he is. I used to jump on farmers' sleighs and wagons when I was a little bit of a kid and out into the country and play around rivers, and mother was afraid that she'd lose me. So I started at 4 years of age to go to school.
And that was in Angus, Ontario?
Well, you would say yes.
I see.
Yeah.
And what was the first work you did around that part of the country?
Oh, I did chores for neighbors and farmers, and quite early started going for our own cow to a farm nearby and bringing it home for mother to milk, and then I got a job getting a cow for a lady by the name of Mrs. Webb. Nearly everybody in the small town, nearly every family had kept a cow, and she pastured her cow a mile and a half from town. I used to have to go and get it in the morning, wait while she milked it, take it back to the pasture, and then come back and go to school. And the round trip, the 2 round trips were 6 miles, and I'd repeat that at night, which made 12 miles a day I walked, going for the cow and taking it back to pasture.
And how much did you get paid for doing that?
Well, now, I don't know whether I got paid or not. I think it was not very, because I got 25 cents a month.
That's not very much, is it?
360 miles walked, and I said to my mother, now that's not very much I'm getting, Mother, for all that distance that I walk. And she says, well, you know, Mrs. Webb pays $2.50 pasture for the cow, and she can't afford to pay more than $2.75 to have the cow. So I guess you'll have to keep walking for 25 cents a month.
You'd wear out a lot of shoe leather with that.
Didn't wear any shoes those days. No, very few boys wore shoes. Only 2 boys in our town went to school with shoes on in the summertime. One was a doctor's son and one was a hotel keeper's son. All the rest of us were barefoot.
I see. And when did you first come out the west?
In April 1897.
And where did you go to first?
I went to Vancouver. I had a brother in Vancouver who was pretty nearly 4 years older than I was, and he was bookkeeper for a dry goods store there, and I worked for a company. After I was there about 3 weeks, I got a job at $25 a month, and worked for that wage for 6 months, and then I got $30 a month for a year, and then I got $35 for about 7 months when I came to Golden.
I see. And whereabouts did you live while you were in Vancouver?
Most of the time I lived on in a room in why do I forget the name of the place? It was a brick building, a 3-story brick building on Hastings Street between Granville and Seymour. There was a ladies' tailor shop in the bottom and rooms upstairs. We got a room about 15 by 25 for $5 a month, and my brother and I shared that between us.
And did this include light and water and heat?
No, there was, the building in those days wasn't even wired. We burnt a coal oil lamp and burnt coal that coal deliverers had to carry 3 stories up the stairs.
There's been quite a few changes in Vancouver since then.
Oh, a world of them.
And how did you come to Golden?
Well, naturally the salary was a little small, and I was otherwise dissatisfied with the job. The boss I had was leaving, and a new man came to take his place from Vermont, and he was a real nice man, and I hated to leave him, but I decided that I should get away from the job that I'd been at a couple of years, and he got the job for me in Golden here. Met a gentleman that needed a clerk and needed a bookkeeper and a clerk in the post office, because the town wasn't big enough then to support a post office of its own, and had to be operated in conjunction with other business.
Have you lived in Golden ever since?
Ever since. That was 1st of June 1899, and now I've been here by the 1st of June 62 years.
And now, Mr. King, I'd like to have a few reminiscences about old times in Golden. You would be here when the boats were running?
Oh, yes. The boats started in 1887, but they ran till 1914, so that they ran 15 years during my time.
Do you remember some of the captains of these boats?
Oh, yes, I knew them all. Captain Armstrong was the first one, and then Captain Bacon worked on his boat, his purser, and wheelman, and he took his examination and became a captain. And later Captain Neville Russell, who had a small boat up at Lake Windermere, he became a captain on the boats. And they had a Captain McTurnan in here, and there were several.
And did all traffic travel by boat at that time?
Well, no, there was a lot of freighting, and of course the boats froze up. The river froze up in November, and didn't operate again till the ice went out in April. And between times, the stuff for the upper country was all hauled by teams.
Were these 2-horse teams?
Most of them, but some of them that made a business of it had 4-horse teams.
And I gather along the freighting route there were several stopping places.
Nearly every place was a stopping place.
Where
That's how they got their... Well, you see, it would depend on what time they would leave town as to where they could get for the night, because a team could hardly make more than 16 to 20 miles a day.
I see. And where was the closest stopping place?
The first place was at Tom Haddon's, 14 miles south of here. And from then on, there were every 4 or 5 miles, or as close as the houses were. When they came first, sometimes there was distances of 9 to 12 miles between houses.
Are any of these old stopping houses, the buildings, still there?
Oh yes, the Haddon place is still there, and the Johnson place, Doug Piggott is on that one, and the Hog Ranch is gone, of course. That was at Parson, but there's several of them still standing. The McKeonans kept a stopping place, and their house is gone and their stable's gone.
Is that log house at the bottom of Sinclair, on Sinclair Creek, is that one of the old stopping places?
Well, it wasn't one of the old ones. That was a fellow by the name of Jack McCullough had that, and he wasn't married for a long time after he took it up, and he didn't keep stoppers.
I see.
They kept McKay's kept the stoppers before you got to there.
I see. That would be on Vermilion Creek.
No, at Kirk's. that big white house.
Oh, I see.
They had the McKay family owned that.
I see. That's sometimes known as the Upper Ranch, is it?
No, the Upper Ranch was the one down at Luxor.
I see.
That was called the Upper Ranch. There was McKay's had just sold out when I came here to a company called the Elk Park Ranching Company. Their headquarters were in Truro, Nova Scotia, but it's pretty hard to operate a farm or a ranch when the owners are 4,000 miles away.
I gather that the McKays were one of the big ranchers in the country at that time?
At that time, before they sold, I guess they were the biggest. The farm known as the Experimental Farm, and now Elkhorn was called the Big House Ranch, and belonged to a man with the name of Mackay when I came here. And that would be about the second largest. He had a store also in Windermere, run under the name of the East Kootenay Trading Company.
I see. Do you remember any stories of the old-timers in here?
Well, yes. Some of them hardly should go on a tape, I guess. But, there were a fine lot of fellas. Some of them drank a little too much, but they were all good fellas, and in those early days, you could trust everybody. Everybody that would go into a store and buy anything eventually paid for it. As soon as he got the money, he paid. And the banks were easy with the loan of money. If you had credit for, say, $10,000 for your business, they'd discount all the notes from customers that you'd bring in, and that didn't count against your credit at all. Charlie Warren used to have $10,000, $12,000 worth of customers' notes under discount all the time, besides the use of the money that they lent him on arrangement.
That'd be very convenient today, wouldn't it?
That'd be very convenient today, but it isn't done today. And in my 6 years and a half of keeping books for Mr. Charlie Warren, from the spring of 1899 till the fall of 1905, he only had one bad account, and that was $72. And what a contrast from nowadays, when the last 20 years I was in business, I wrote off over $12,000 a year.
Is that right? I gather you were also connected with the sawmill business. Could you tell us a little bit about the early sawmills in this area?
Well, there was, in the early days, there were no small mills. They were all, it was steam power those days, and it had to be a fairly big operation, and the Columbia River Lumber Company had a mill on the riverbank at Golden, and floated their logs down to the mill, and they had also a mill at Beavermouth. But at Beavermouth, the undercurrent was so strong that the logs would go under the boom, and they lost eventually one night 2,000 logs, and they gave it up and closed the mill, and then later enlarged the mill at Golden to a very big cut. They had cut in 10 hours up to 250,000 feet.
And were all these logs brought in by river, or?
Nearly all brought in by river, because there was only horse transportation in those early days, and till the lumber company enlarged and built their own railroad, why they all had to be brought by team to the river and then floated down the river. They had a boom that would hold a year's cut, which would be maybe 25 million feet.
I see. And later, when they put in the railroads, where were they logging?
Then they logged all the way from Golden to Donald, and the connection with the railroad was at Donald. They had their own engines and their own cars, and they would, with teams, haul to the the side of the railroad track, and the loading machines, they'd load the cars and haul them down to the connection with the main line a mile and a half west of Donald, and then the CPR crews took charge of them there and hauled them up to Nicholson, and they had unloading men at Nicholson to roll them into the river and let them float down to the mill.
Did you have any experiences with the hotels around here?
Yes, I boarded for 2.5 years at the Kootenay House, and they were pretty rough and rugged. Gambling going on until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the bars, and no particular license laws. They stayed open as long as anybody wanted to buy liquor, and conveniences and rest sections in connection with the hotel are pretty crude. I remarked to one fellow that it was a bad place to have to go, out behind the stable, and he said, well, when I came it was far worse than that. He said there was a fellow come into town, and he was sitting on an end of the log that was the only convenience they had then, and the bullet went whizzing by his ear, and he looked up, and the fellow said, hey there, you're in the ladies' toilet, get to the other end of the log.
And what was Golden like when you came there?
Well, we had, in those early days, we had 4 hotels, and a stranger came into town, and he asked a local barber that we had here, and he said, what kind of a town is this you have here? Well, he says, we got the best balanced town in Canada. He says, everybody's got an even break. He said, there's 4 hotels, 4 red light houses, and 4 churches. So nobody's got any advantage. And one of the hotels later installed 5 rooms with bath, besides putting in the public bathroom, at least one for the general run of the hotel rooms. And it was the first hotel in the interior of British Columbia to have 5 baths in connection with their hotel, with their rooms.
Well, that's interesting information. Now, you had some connection with farmers in this area. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the farms?
Yes, there were small farms, of course, at the time I came. But everybody that had a piece of land, seemed very proud and satisfied that he had something to look forward to. Everything, of course, was done by horses and horse transportation, apart from the river boats. And as many of the horses were raised in the Windermere district, they had 3 gates across the highway between Golden and Windermere. One was near Sinclair, one near Briscoe, and one about 18 miles south of Golden, so that in case the horse wanted to go back to the place of its birth, why, he was stopped by these gates, and it wasn't so hard to go and get him as it would otherwise be. And freighters and drivers going up and down the road got out without any complaint and opened the gates and drove through and closed the gates behind them. And I never heard any complaints at all from any of these men who were so bothered. Altogether, I think on both sides of the river there were just about 30 settlers on the land between here and the crossroads to Athelmer. And some of them were just a mile or 2 apart, and some of them were 10 to 12 miles apart. The furthest apart, if I recall now, was Jack Dodd, who was at Beards Creek at about mileage 27, and there was nobody else lived from there till George McMillan's at mileage 42.
I see. Were there many schools around at that time?
There was one school at Windermere and one at Golden, and a lady teacher at Windermere and a gentleman teacher at Golden, and in the whole district between the main line and Fort Steele, that's all the schools were in the whole territory.
I see. And were you in Golden at the time of the famous stolen church going through Golden?
Oh yes, I was here. I came in 99, and it was, I think, in 1900 that church was taken up on a scow, pushed up in front of the boat.
I suppose you wouldn't want to say whether you had any part in
I had no part in it, but the man that took it told me that he thought that as Windermere was getting the church, that the Golden congregation should at least get the bell. So he said he took the bell off the scow and dropped it in the river with a rope on it, with a stick attached to the rope, that it would float, and they'd know after the boat went out where it was, and he pulled it out of the water.
And the bell has been in Golden ever since?
Not quite. It was retaken by Windermere last summer, and but I understand the bishop has ordered that it come back to Golden, and now it's in the belfry again, calling their folk to church.
And I think it probably should stay there.
I think so. After 60 years, they should have forgotten about the stealing of the bell.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. King, for putting this on tape. I'm sure the people of the Kootenays will be glad to hear this story as another of the tales of the Kootenay.